Hi, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Live. I'm Christine Tao. I'm the co founder and CEO at Sounding Board. We are a dynamic leader development platform providing coaching and mentoring solutions. And this series is all about talking with inspiring leaders in the people space to hear more about them and also some of the amazing work that they've done. And so today I have Anna Lenhardt with me. Anna and I have known each other now for many years. And we've also had the pleasure of working together across a few of the companies that she's helped scaled. And I'm particularly excited because she is now striking out on her own and has started her own firm to bring that expertise to all of you. And so, Anna, welcome to the show. And please, I'd love to get a quick background and intro on you for everyone here.
First, thank you, Christine, for having me. And hello, everyone online. Although I can't see your faces, thanks so much for joining us today. So, as Christine said, I'm Anna Lenhardt. I'm the founder and principal of Lenhardt Partners. I'm also the mom to two beautiful children, one puppy named Ginger, and two guinea pigs currently. So, it's a very busy household. I've spent just about 20 years in human resources, sort of starting my career actually in the arts as an opera singer, and coming to New York to sing opera. And then from there, getting my first job on 52nd and Park Avenue with McKinsey and Company. And then I've spent the last 20 years working in consulting and helping take to scale and build multiple startups, I think 5 at my last count. And now I'm privileged to be working with a number of clients that are also getting ready to go public and really thinking about what's the right HR organization, programs, process, culture that they really need to build to have a successful public entry into the market.
Amazing. And I know that's very relevant to a lot of folks given the macroeconomic climate that we've been in, that there hasn't been a lot of IPOs. So a lot of companies
Mm-hmm.
are spending this time preparing. And I think oftentimes question is, what does that actually entail?
Yeah.
So we will definitely dive into that. But before we do so, because I already just learned something new about you, I don't think I knew that you were an opera singer.
Yeah.
We always start this show with also just getting to know a little bit about you and what's your origin story. And so I'd
Yeah.
love to start there before we start diving into your background and professional background.
So I'm from Oregon originally, and I am one of those, bright, starry-eyed artists who came to New York City with 2 suitcases from a really small town in New Mexico to sing opera at NYU and studied at Juilliard as well. So I came in with, just basically who I was. And from there, got my first job in sort of the corporate America at McKinsey and just kept being curious and asking questions and learning, and took my first kind of HR staffing role and really fell in love with working with people and better understanding how to motivate them, what their behaviors were, what they loved about their work, and just seeing that impact. And so I fell in love with kind of HR from an arts perspective. And then sort of from there, got my Master of Arts at NYU and hit the road as a consultant to learn and dig deeply more into HR. I took a job at Deloitte, worked in HR transformation, and did projects all over the country and with global clients, which was amazing. Learned so much. And then my parents are entrepreneurs, so I think it's been in my blood for a long time.
Yeah, same here.
So
Same here.
yeah, exactly. So it's like I think once it's in there, it's the life, and it calls to you in some way. So even when I was a consultant, I was always very entrepreneurial. I was always jumping into new projects, and I would find interesting things to do and kind of do things outside of my kind of purview, maybe as a consultant, to get involved in projects across the company. And with that, I realized, hey, I really have this entrepreneurial kind of bug or itch I need to scratch, right? And so I took my my first startup job at a small startup in New York City in the meatpacking district. It was very cool. And built IKEA desks and ran HR and operations and finance and did everything and learned to work with founders. And I sort of started there. And from there, just fell in love with it. Then jumped into my next startup and was fortunate enough to take them kind of exit just as they're about to go public a year later. And so really helped them scale from, so this is at Oscar, from about 200 to over 1,000 people. And then was fortunate enough to get the head of people job at Hippo Insurance to take them to a public company. So seen sort of everything from Series A of building IKEA desks and setting up our first payroll systems and, HR process and hiring and, all the things that, bigger companies flesh out to standing on the stage at the New York Stock Exchange and taking Hippo public. So it's been an incredible journey, a lot of learnings along the way, but super grateful for all of it.
Wow, yeah, and we met when you were at Oscar,
Yep.
and, I still remember you were one of the first people leaders I met in starting Sounding Board when you made the move here to the West Coast to join
Yep.
Hippo, and so it was also just incredible for us to see and me to see the scale that Hippo went through all the way through
Yeah.
IPO.
Yeah.
But one more question on your background before we go there, which is when you were, when you came to New York, you were there to pursue opera singing. Did you do that concurrent to having your jobs consulting, or was there a transition somehow away
Yeah.
from doing that full time into HR and people roles?
So I started off, I think, at the beginning doing singing opera and working as well. So sort of trying to juggle both.
Oh,
Um, I quickly realized that that was not sustainable, and I came to the point where I sort of had to make a choice. And I
mm,
think maybe some artists have to, maybe they don't. And for me, I realized I was really passionate about this new kind of business and this new HR space that I was learning about. And so, I decided for me at that point that, I wanted to pursue this as like the next chapter for me. So I sort of think about my life as a book in a lot
yeah.
of ways. Like there was a small town girl singing opera to New York to consulting to startups, right? And so, I still get asked to sing at weddings for family every once in a while and stuff like that. But and I embarrass my children for sure singing opera when they need it. But for now, like I've really found my passion for HR and for people, and it feels very rewarding.
Oh, that's amazing. I love that. My mom was a dancer growing up, and so
Oh,
that
that's
sort of
amazing.
artistic spirit runs in my family as well, which is
Yeah.
why I wanted to learn a bit more. Well,
Yeah.
look, and I think, one of the things that I definitely saw in working with you was just a deep, passion, I think, for what you do, and also a perspective, I think, on how the people function really could be one that could help grow the business, but in a
Hmm.
way that's still aligned to values, culture, integrity, equity in a way that was also really important to you. And
Yes.
so I'd love to hear a little bit more about your perspective on that. And then specifically, I think how that's sort of leading to your focus at Lenhardt to focus on this pre-IPO stage for companies. Is it that it's critical there, or, how do those two things play together?
Yeah, I mean, I think that, from the beginning, I think no matter if you're a Series A company or you're thousands of people and a publicly traded company, I think creating a foundation of values driven organization from the very beginning is very important. And I think that I think it's easy to get distracted in a lot of ways. It's easy to get distracted by building that next fancy program or all those things that can be really distracting to founders, to CEOs, to HR leaders, right? But I think at its core, I think it's really important to start from the beginning. So building the foundations of like what are the values of the organization and not just what do they say, but how do they act and what do they put their money where their mouth is, right? I think that's super important. And I think as an HR leader, cultivating that as a part of your culture is, I think, one of your primary roles, especially as you're building a startup. Like you're almost that integrity, that heart of the organization to make sure that its values and its actions are aligning. And that's can be a really difficult position to be in. But I think if you focus on as an HR leader, whether it's building those equitable promotion practices, pay practices, and hiring practices, and you do that from the beginning, it's much easier, I think, to untangle those bad habits of maybe whether you see bias or other things in the organization later. That really, I believe, comes from not starting off with those core foundational values aligned to your actions. So I would say for me, that's always been really important and something I've always fought for in my career, and been very noisy about, is that building a exceptional organization means sometimes making really hard choices,
Yeah.
to align to those values, whether it's equity and equality, whether it's, gay, trans rights, whether it's women's reproductive rights. I don't think we're in a place as an organization where leaders can no longer just have no statement, or
Mm.
their values and their actions and their behaviors don't align. I think we're trending in this area of where I think leaders need to have a voice, and maybe it's not a inflammatory voice. That's not the point, but a view and a perspective and a value and ethical system. Because I do think that's becoming more and more important, for leaders as we're going on. So, to answer your question, I think as you build that organization, whether it's a Series A organization or larger, you as an HR leader coming to that with a view of, hey, these things are important. So, how are we building this into our organization? How are we leading with our values? Are we going to say something on Pride Month that's not just transactional,
Yeah.
right? Are we going to make a donation to the Trevor Project or Hedrick Martin Institute or other organizations that are really doing fantastic work, or not, right? How are we showing up to deliver to our values? And so a lot of times when I come in, especially as companies are preparing to go public, whether it's 12 to 18 months or 6 months, what is your value system? And I almost start from there and then rebuild and say, what are those programs? What are those critical things that matter? Because you living those things will actually show up on the stock exchange. They'll show up in your share price. They'll show up in how you present yourself and how your CEO presents himself, and how the company culture kind of comes together to make you not successful on when you ring the bell, but also many years past it.
Yeah. Well, I'd love for you to give some maybe tactical or examples or advice for folks, because I feel like this is a challenge I often hear from leaders, which is, but even if I have that perspective, what if my
Mm-hmm.
CEO or founder doesn't share that same perspective?
Yeah.
How do I influence to get the decision makers around me and my peers to buy into the different initiatives or programs or perspective that I have, and
Yep.
understand why it's not only important, but to actually invest in it? Because I do think that was something that I really saw even when working with you at Hippo, that, not only were you stating what those were, the company was really financially investing in that.
Yes.
And look at the success the company was able to have in the scale. But I don't think that's true, unfortunately, for many others.
Yeah. Well, I think I was incredibly unfortunate with Asaf, who I worked with at Hippo. We were very aligned on our values, and I think that made a big difference in how we were able to act toward them. So I would say at a very practical level, for someone listening that wants to maybe, act more on the values or build a really value-centered organization, I'd say first of all, you have to understand what's important to your CEO. The same things that, to your point, that are important to you may not be as important to them, but I bet you there are some things that you align on, right? Maybe for them, they're very passionate about women's rights because their mom was a single mom, or maybe they're really passionate about poverty alleviation because they came from, a poor community, right? And they had those struggles as a kid. I think you need to find what those shared values are first, right?
Mhm.
Because I do think, that there are those 3 or 4 or 5 things that you can align on that are really important. And I think when I came into Oscar and Hippo and other organizations, I've always worked with the CEO to understand what's important to them, and then really centered a lot of those values orientation around those things, right? And really, really keeping them honest about the fact they believe in these things doesn't just mean
Mhm.
in post. It actually means action. It actually means money. It means volunteerism. It means giving back. It means being vocal about your belief system. So I think you have to start there and find what those
Mhm.
shared values and belief systems are, right? Um, because I truly believe that you'll find that match. And then I think once you do, as an HR leader, you can really lean into those things and drive that as an organization. And I think it differentiates you from other companies because you, the CEO, and the company has that culture and those views. So I think you have to start there. And then I think once you have those three or four things, then it's like, okay, well, how do we embed this in how we hire and how we promote and how we hold people accountable? And how does that kind of show up in what we value in the organization?
Is there any specific initiative or, if it's not a program, but maybe a framework or work that you've done in your prior organizations, or even some of the work that you're doing now with your
Yeah,
clients that you can share with us to help
sure.
people sort of tangibly understand what that might look like?
Yeah, so I think, I mean, there's some that are, I think, fairly, whether it's controversial or fairly, directive. So one of the clients I was working with is very passionate about women's rights, and with Roe versus Wade coming along and diminishing the access to, abortion rights, especially for our underprivileged communities and women, they offered to supplement those costs, right, for people to travel to other states. That's hugely controversial, but was very aligned to the value system of that CEO and that organization, right? And they had a stand on that they believed that women's reproductive rights were important. I would say the second is we built a program actually at Oscar Health. I built a program to support our gay, trans, LGBTQ plus communities to offer them financial support to adopt or go through a surrogacy program, whatever they preferred. And so we put our money where our mouth is. We rolled it out to the whole company. I think we were a Series C or Series B company at that time, which was very forward looking, but was very important to the CEO and to the rest of the organization that we were very invested in families and giving everyone the option to have families. So that's another program. The third program with HIPPO that we implemented was offering free childcare during COVID for our employees in California near our Palo Alto location. So we took over YMCA and
Oh my
we
god.
supplemented the cost of childcare for our families to come in, to be able to come into the office. Obviously, we had other testing and other procedures for parents to come in, but we knew that having to be home with your children during this time, with school being so inconsistent and everyone trying to figure this out, but we wanted to give our parents an opportunity to just to invest in work and to be there. So we had lunch for them, we had childcare, and that was something. I think those are three very distinctive programs
Yeah.
that align to the values of those organizations and CEOs, but also something where myself along with the CEO and the rest of the leaders, we could say, hey, this is something we really believe in and we're signing up for and we're investing in. And I think it's those kinds of things. It doesn't have to be, this huge, massive program. Maybe it's just something small that has really significant impact. And I
Yeah.
think those are the kinds of things I think that organizations should really be thinking about, that really creates a sense of community and culture and is really impactful for the people in their organizations.
And, you know, um, certainly, I can already understand what impact that has to employee engagement, retention, productivity, all those metrics that
Yes.
we're supposed to be following. But is there anything that you want to share about what the outcome was for that or the impact that that had on the business and the organization?
Absolutely. I think that, in terms of the childcare program that we implemented, I think that was critical for retention.
Yeah.
It was critical for keeping people in, a fairly expensive area coming into the office. And I also think it engaged our employees and kept them through, IPO process, which can be very stressful and very demanding on an organization. And because they knew they understood the heart of who we were, and that at our heart was our employees, and we were deeply invested in them. I do think that made a significant difference. And our retention scores were better, promotions, our equity across the organization, it all spiked, right? Because people saw that we were really putting our money where our mouth was. I hate to say that again, but we were really not just talking, but we were showing with action.
Well, the other piece I think around values in organization that often comes into play is how that shows up in leadership and how
Yes.
you can have that really embedded or integrated into how leaders are interacting with their teams. And certainly we saw that that was another area that you invested in. Is
Yep.
there, what can you say about what, a program simultaneously to development of your leaders, like what's the interplay there and the importance of those two things?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, honestly, the integration, I think when we use sounding board multiple times within our organization, is it really helped to drive and align those values for our managers and leaders.
Yeah.
I think, a lot of times we think when people talk about values, it sounds so, high in the sky. And I actually think it's very practical, which is, okay, what are as you think about developing your managers and developing your leaders, as you go through the evolution of going from a Series A to a public company, right? Values are the core of that process, but how you empower and enable your managers and leaders to live with those values, I think you need that support. So whether it's a coaching organization, your internal business partners, and your learning teams, really all working together to drive toward those behaviors that you want your managers and leaders to have, those key capabilities that you want them to have, I think that's really important. And I think some organizations I've seen, especially as I'm working with multiple clients in this space, make this very complicated, right? They're trying to implement too much. They're trying to do
Mhm.
too many things. And I think what you have to understand is people's adaptability and ability to change, you have to meet them where they are, right?
Yeah.
So I think in a lot of ways, you need to understand, as I'm developing these managers and leaders, we're coaching them on these behaviors. Like, are they, as you evolve as an organization, you get closer to going public, do they have those capabilities? Can they be coached? Is this the right place for them? Because in a lot of ways, as you evolve, it's unpopular, but as you evolve in a startup, not all of your leaders are able to lead at these different levels of maturity, right?
Yeah.
And I think that there is a really sometimes really hard conversations about, we know that you have these skills or capabilities, but at this level we're looking for these things, not just these values, but these new skills and capabilities. So I think it gets more complex as you go along. But what I will say is that as you develop your managers and leaders, keeping focused on those core values and capabilities and aligning your HR team around that, and keeping it very simple. You don't need to build 4 or 5 complex programs. You don't need to, try to do too many things at once. It's really about almost like reiterating foundational cultural values and reiterating those things through coaching, like with Sounding Board or with your business partner and with your learning function. And how do you do that in a way that really resonates with people? Um, so I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but I do think there are some real ways that HR leaders can bring those things together and really simplify rather
Yeah.
than make things more complicated.
Do you have an example of maybe what might be complex and then what might feel a little more streamlined or simple?
Yes. So, I'm going through this activity now with a couple clients where we're going through a prioritization of their HR organization. Like,
Mhm.
what are the things that are important to be, that are kind of necessary and critical to get to be ready as
Mm.
a public company, right? And essentially they're just bitten off too much, right? They're trying to implement multiple programs at the same, they're sort of playing catch up. They're trying to multiple all these programs they think they're supposed to have at this scale.
I see.
They're working to, from development plans to succession planning to org redesign to just multiple programs, when instead it's like, okay, well, what are the core things that we need to focus on? We need to focus on our culture, right? Like, do we have the right people, the right capabilities, and the right seats, right? Let's start there. Do we have the right systems? to empower that. What are we doing manually? No, no more manual. Like we have AI, we have great systems, right? Like we can't do that anymore. It's just not sustainable, and it adds to your workforce in ways that, and it drags down energy, I think, from the HR team and from the org to really invest if you're sending out Google spreadsheets to do performance management. Okay. So, and then on the third place, from a coaching perspective, I think the critical piece is not just the coaching element to making sure managers and leaders are ready, but they know how to tell the story. And so the one critical piece I talk about for IPO readiness is you have to have internal communications. You have to have a communication strategy and a way to bring people along in the journey, right? This is what we're doing and this is why. This is the time frame that we're going to operate against. This is what we need from you. This is who to talk to. Do you have questions? Here are some talking points for managers and leaders. And so many organizations I go into, this is a totally new concept for them. And I would say within the startup space, not all organizations, obviously. And it's such a critical piece that, as coming in as a consultant and having worked in multiple startups, it's one of the first things that I fight for when I'm talking to these organizations or other leaders, is like, you have to have this. You think it seems soft, but you don't realize how critical this communication piece is as you're preparing and as you're about to go public as a company. And without that locked down and your managers and leaders understanding the story and how to tell it, it makes so much more chaotic, mixed messages, issues in the media. So I would really always encourage organizations, like, really look at that piece as a really critical element.
Yeah, I think that's such a important point, because when we think about, preparing for a public event, oftentimes there is a very technical checklist of the
Mm-hmm.
things that you have to do. And I think what you're talking about is people readiness. Are your
Yeah.
leaders and are your people knowing that this is a long journey, often
Yes.
lots of winds and turns, as I've heard,
Yep.
that you know, how do you ensure that your people are ready and able to actually help you get there? And I
Yes.
think, ready to adapt, which is another word we hear a lot,
Yes.
right? People have to be adaptable and
Yep.
resilient. And it feels like you're saying communication and actually having an intentional strategy around that is one way you can drive that type of adaptability in your team.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, you said that very beautifully. So, yes, I would completely agree. And I think having that people readiness, to your point, yes, you come in with the technical checklist and say, these are all the systems, the processes, the compliance things you need to
Yeah.
have into place. But what's going to get you there? What's going to get you that great stock price after the offering and beyond? That's your people. And if they're not brought with you on this journey and they're not cheering for you and they're not celebrating all these wins and working hard when things are tough, you're not going to accomplish everything you want to for yourself, the CEO, for your shareholders. And, like, ultimately, I always fight for all of my folks that are, employees in the organization that are getting shares, right? Because I want them to be successful. I want them to be able to pay for their child's college education or for
Yeah.
their grandmother's retirement or whatever those things are that are important to them.
Amazing. Well, any final thoughts for folks out there, or advice? And then also, how do people get in touch with you if they're interested in learning how to, get more of that Anna magic?
Well, first, I would say to everyone listening, thank you for listening. Love to hear your feedback after this conversation, and I hope it was helpful for you. And I would say, don't keep fighting for the values. Don't keep fighting for the heart of the organization. It gets really hard. It can be really discouraging to be in HR. There's a lot of burnout in this space,
Yeah.
but find your support system, find your network, and understand what you're doing is right. And fighting for those values is what makes exceptional companies. And that, no matter what they say, the CEO couldn't do this job without you. So I would just leave with that. And then I would, love to hear from folks if they'd like to talk to me or, about all the great work that we're doing. You can find me at lenhardtpartners.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well too, and all my contact information is online. So folks would like to reach out to me, I'd love to hear from you.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the time today. I learned a lot new about you and about new ideas for companies. So, and that's why I love these conversations. But thanks again, and hope all of you enjoyed the conversation as well.
Thanks, Christine.
All right.